Right before we jump into this video, would you like to take better pictures in only 11 days? Well, I created a free mini video course that you can sign up for right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/11 days. So now, enjoy this video. Jared pulling FroKnowsPhoto.com, and congratulations on picking up a Canon EOS R. And in this video, I want to help you understand what all of the buttons do on the outside, how to put the lenses on, and then go into the entire menu system. Now, this is going to be a pretty long video to help you figure out how to set up this bad boy and not have to turn back to the user's manual as often as you might have to. You could look at this as if it is your user's manual. Now, if you want to jump around, there is a table of contents down below. So go ahead, jump around, see which sections work for you. But now let's look at the body. First things first, let's flip the camera over and show you where the battery goes. The door flops open, pop the battery out, and here is your battery. Now, a good rule of thumb is to at least have 2 fully charged batteries when you go out to shoot. Invest in these Canon batteries. I'm personally not a fan of third-party batteries. I know some people like to sell them, and they are a little less expensive, but I like to stick with the brand, like the Canon brand right here. To pop it back in, just press down that white tab, let it slide in, press it fully down, you hear the click, shut the door, and there you have it. Now, the next step is, where does the memory card go? Right here on the side, you have a door. Just go ahead and slide it like that, pops open, press the memory card down, you can pop the memory card out. To put it back in, it only goes in one way, it's an SD card. You go ahead and put it there, hear it click in, shut the door, and now you have a card loaded into the camera. Next up, let me show you how to take a lens off this camera as well as put it back on. Right now I have on here the 24-105 f4 kit lens that comes with this body. Now, this is an RF lens, which means it attaches natively to this mount. To take it off, I press this button right over here. I turn the lens towards me. Boom, you pop it out. To put it back on, you have a red line right there. You have a red line on the camera. Line up the red lines like this, and then turn it away till you hear the click, and now that lens is on. So that's how you put on a RF lens. Now, what do you do if you have an EF lens that you want to put onto this camera? Well, right over here, I have the adapter as well as another lens. So I'm going to take off this one lens, put it down, and let's talk about the adapter real fast. So here is the EF lens adapter. Now, keep in mind, there is no elements, there's no glass in this, there's no moving parts other than the control ring on the outside if you have the version that does the control ring. This goes on like any other lens. You find the red dot, which so happens to be right there. You line up the red dot, and then you go ahead and you turn it till it clicks. You take your EF lens, in this case I've got a massive 70-200. You line up the red dot with the red dot, boom, lock it in, and now you can use your EF lenses on this EOS R. So I switched back to the 24-105 because it's much lighter and easier to hold for this video. Another thing I need to show you about this lens is that it comes locked. There is a lock switch right here on the side. In order to unlock it, just click unlock. Now you can go ahead and zoom with this lens, and then when you're not using it, you can go ahead and hit lock again, and it is locked in. So now where's the on-off switch? Right here on the top left-hand side, you've got off, you've got on. You just switch it like that, off, then on. When you're not using it, of course, turn it off to save battery power. Now, right next to that, this is what they call an EVF, or an electronic viewfinder. This is where you're going to see the preview, the live preview of everything that the lens and the camera are seeing. So you look right through here. Now, right here on the side, there is your diopter. So if you wear glasses or you don't want to wear your glasses, you can toy around with the diopter, which is going to help you be able to get the viewfinder sharper when you go ahead and shoot your images. Moving around, you've got your top LCD panel. This is where you're going to see a whole bunch of information. This is how you go ahead and make changes to your settings. It's all going to be reflected right up here, but keep in mind, all of the changes that you are doing also are reflected on the back panel LCD as well as inside the EVF. Right here, you've got a mode dial. When you press the mode dial down, you're going to be able to switch from manual to aperture priority to shutter priority to program mode. You can also change into the video modes as well. You have a command dial right here. This is going to allow you to change your aperture when you're in manual mode. And then if you want to change your shutter speed, there's a command dial right here that you can just toggle like this back and forth, and that is going to change your shutter speed. These dials also can change other settings when you press other buttons, so keep that in mind as we go forward. You've got a lock button, which pretty much locks the ability to turn this dial and this wheel. It's not something I really ever find myself using. You've got a light right here, a light bulb, that doesn't pop up a flash or anything because there's no flash on this camera. When you press it, it lights up this screen, but you could also map out that button to do a couple of other functions. This red button right here is your record button for when you're going to go ahead and shoot video. Moving around the top right here, you've got an MF button, which is a function button that you can make changes. So when you hit this, turn the front dial, turn the back dial, you're going to change different settings. Right here is your shutter button. When you press the button halfway down, that's what you're going to do to get your autofocus. And when you press it fully, you're going to get photos. And when you hold it down, if you're in continuous shooting, you're going to get continuous photos. On top of the camera, you have your hot shoe, which is where you would put an external flash, or you would put, say, a microphone if you're a vlogger. Flipping the camera over to the bottom, you've got where your tripod mount goes. So this is where you would put your tripod plate. Also on the bottom of the camera, you have a connector for putting the battery grip and the vertical grip if you go ahead and pick up one of those. Now moving around to the back of the camera, this is your flip out rotatable LCD screen. It is a touch screen. You can flip it around just like this. You can flip it around like that. You can close it when you're not using it, or you could just flip it around and leave it out like this, so you can go ahead and have it like any other camera that you're using. You've got your menu button, which of course activates your menu. You got info button, which shows you info and also allows you to toggle on the screen the different info commands. You've got your play button down here for playback. You've got your trash can to summon Oscar the Grouch, though he doesn't ever show up. And that joke will never get old because I use it in every video, which is perfectly fine. You've got your up, up, down, down, left, right, contra code buttons. And you also have a button in the middle for Q and setting. Q, you'll see when we turn on the camera and go through the menus, is a really quick way. Q stands for quick, basically, to get to the menu functions that you want to change quickly. Moving up on the back of the camera, you have a new thing called a multi-function bar, which is touch sensitive. So you could set this to change your ISO, you could set it to change a bunch of different settings. You can lock it. We'll show you all of that when we get to the setting in the menu. And on the top right-hand side of the back of the camera, there's a couple of buttons. You got AF on, which is used if you want to do back button focus, which a lot of Canon shooters like to do. I personally don't do back button focus, so I go ahead and map this out to a different feature, which we can show you later on. You have this asterisk button, which is another type of function that I personally don't use, so I map this out to turn on IAF. And then you have a checkerboard type thing, which is used when you're in reviewing your images. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, and that's how you can see multiple images on the back of the screen or zoom in on your photos. Now, before I wrap this up and get to the left side of the camera, I wanted to tell you that this is the proximity sensor. So as you put your eye up to this part, it will change from the LCD screen to the electronic viewfinder and back again. You can make changes so that the screen doesn't end up coming on, or you could deactivate that, but just know that that's what that is right there. Moving around to the side of the camera, you've got a remote port, so you could put a wired remote right there. You've got a microphone jack as well as a headphone jack, HDMI, as well as a USB-C. So that is the outside of the camera and what the buttons do. Before we go through the menu system, there's something I need to tell you. We are connected via HDMI to what's called an Atomos, which is going to record the menus and the screen. So the reason I'm going to be looking at this thing is because when we're plugged into the Atomos, I cannot see the back of my screen. There is no menu information, but we're doing this so that you can see what's going on. So when I start by hitting the menu button, and that brings up the first menu, which is a camera icon, and then underneath you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are different folders that I like to call them folders. You can go through. Now it starts off with image quality. Now I can't go through and touch the screen. You can go through and touch the screen because you're not plugged into this Atomos. So what I'm going to be using is this joystick down here to move through the menu settings. Now, starting off, we've got image quality. It is default to large JPEG. This is the first thing that I like to change. I like to go ahead and turn this top dial to go to RAW. RAW C is a smaller RAW file. I like to stick to just regular RAW, and then on the back, I personally turn JPEG off. Now, if you want to shoot both, you could do JPEG plus JPEG large, or if you're doing both, I would probably go just to small 1 and RAW so that you have a RAW file and a JPEG, but in most cases, I turn off JPEG. I hit the set button right here on the back, which is okay, and then I move from there. Next up is dual pixel RAW, which is disabled and most likely will continue to be disabled. This is an interesting feature that allows you to use the dual pixels of this camera to basically take two-ish RAW files together, and then after the fact, you can tweak the focus ever so slightly. It's not the same as using picture mode or portrait mode on your camera, on your phone. It's not like that, and it also takes up twice as much room and doesn't let you shoot as fast. Cropping aspect ratio, in here you've got full, you've got 1.6, you've got 1:1 if you want to be an Instagrammer and shoot in a square. And as I discovered right before making this video, if you do 1:1 and you shoot it in RAW, you'll get a preview in the camera when you're shooting it of what the square would look like. And when you play the picture back on the camera or bring it into the computer, it's still giving you all of that RAW data, the full frame. I personally would leave this on full all the time. I don't see any reason to get out of that. If you really need to, you could crop it square, you could crop it 16:9, you could crop it 4:3, but I just leave it in full all the time. Moving on, we've got image review. This is how long an image will be on your screen or in your EVF after you take it. I hate image review, so I turn it off. What I hate, actually, I can show this, can I? I can hit 2 seconds. Now watch this. I'm gonna go ahead and take a picture. And then what happens is it automatically pops it up. So you're not seeing the image. It stays up for 2 seconds. I hate that. That's distracting. I don't need to see the image after I take it. So I go ahead and I hit the menu mode, brings me back to image review, and I hit off because I don't want that to happen. Release shutter without card, it's on. I don't know why you would want to shoot a picture if there's no card in the camera, so I go ahead and turn this to disabled, and that is the first menu. Did you know that I offer educational guides? I have the FroKnowsPhoto Guide to Getting Out of Auto, the FroKnowsPhoto Guide to Flash Photography, the FroKnowsPhoto Guide to Shooting Video, and the FroKnowsPhoto Guide to Editing Video. To check out free previews of each one of these, head on over to froknowsphoto.com/guides. Now let's get back inside this camera. Moving to number 2, we've got lens aberration corrections. I generally leave this on default where it is. Next up is external speed light control. That's if you're gonna put a flash on the hot shoe. I generally don't shoot with flash, so I'm not gonna go through this menu, but you can see what's there. Flash firing is enabled. You could disable it, which means the flash wouldn't fire, which is kind of stupid that you're gonna put a flash on top of the camera and then disable it. That doesn't make any sense, so let's just leave it on enabled. Going back into the menu, moving over to number 3. At the top, you've got your exposure compensation. I personally don't change exposure comp. I change my exposure if I need to, so I leave that right where it is. You've got ISO speed settings. This is important. So ISO speed, it's currently set to auto. I don't like using ISO auto, but if you're new to the game and you just want to go take pictures, you could go ahead and leave it there. I like to go ahead and just change it to whatever I want it to be. There's other ways that you could access this, but for now, that is the simplest way to do it. You can hit the OK button, the Q button with the set, and then there you go, that is set. ISO speed range is good as well. If you're gonna do auto ISO, or actually ISO speed range, you could set it so it won't go past, minimum's 100, and then it won't go past a maximum of 40,000, which is honestly where this camera tops out anyway. Auto range will mean that the camera will not go past 12,800 if that's where you have it set. It will go to a minimum of 100. So that means that if you're gonna shoot auto and you don't want it going all the way up to 40,000, it never will go up to 40,000 if you go ahead and set it to lower than 40,000. Next up is minimum shutter speed. It's currently set to auto. When you go ahead in here, you see at the bottom it says info and help. Well, on the back of the screen, there's an info button. This is basically a built-in user's manual. So if you don't know what something is and that shows up, hit the info button, and you can read what it says to do right on the screen. So I generally will just leave this on auto right now because it's only for the auto modes, and I'm personally never shooting in the auto modes. Moving back out of this menu, you've got auto lighting optimization. I leave on off. You got highlight tone priority. I also leave that on off. That's more going to affect your JPEG, not your RAW files. Metering timer, that means the meter is going to stay on for 8 seconds. You could change it to be longer. You could change it to be shorter. Exposure simulation. Now this is a good one. This means that when you are using the electronic viewfinder, what you see in the viewfinder is a simulation based off of your exposure. So as you change your shutter speed in manual mode and you let more light in, it's going to get brighter, and as you dial it up and have a longer shutter speed, it's going to go ahead and get darker. This is also a mode you want to be aware of when you are shooting with external flash or strobes. You want to go ahead and turn this off because you won't get an exact representation of what your image is going to look like. You just want to be able to see a bright viewfinder so that you can focus. So keep that in mind if you're somebody who shoots with flash. White balance, I personally leave that on auto white balance unless I'm shooting video. You can do custom white balances where you can change the white balance for yourself. White balance shift, leave that exactly where it is. Color space, sRGB. Also, picture styles is something important. If you're going to shoot JPEG, this is what is going to be saved into your JPEG files with your picture styles. You could do it on full auto, which is going to allow the camera to pick between all of the different picture styles. You can do standard, which is pretty standard, just like it says. Portrait mode for shooting portraits. You've got landscapes. Fine details is probably going to up the sharpening. Neutral. Faithful, which means are you faithful to Canon? Then you've got monochrome. Keep in mind, if you're going to shoot in monochrome and you're shooting JPEGs, it's going to throw away all of the color data, leaving you with just a black and white image. Now, if you are shooting RAW and you shoot in monochrome, only the preview on the back of the screen is going to show up as black and white, and when you get it into the computer, it may be black and white in the RAW file, but all of the color data is there, so you can switch right back into color. You've got user-defined 1, 2, and 3. That's if you want to make your own custom picture styles. I generally go in there and just tweak a couple of things so that the preview on the back of the screen is more representative of what my final image is going to look like in the computer when I'm done working with the RAW file. Now also keep in mind that these picture styles will affect your video as well. Moving over to page 5 of the camera mode, we've got long exposure noise reduction. I personally leave that off. It basically is going to soften up your image by getting rid of some of the noise if you shoot at higher ISOs. I personally don't worry about that at all. Next, you have high ISO speed noise reduction. Now, this only affects your JPEGs. I kind of go in here and turn this to low. I don't even, oh no, I want to turn it off. That it gives me the option to turn it off. I am personally turning that off because I'm never going to use it at all. Dust delete data, I don't touch that setting. Touch shutter is disabled. Now what that means is that if you had the live view on the back of the screen and you go ahead and you touch the back screen, it's going to take a picture. That's really a pain in the ass, so I turn that off totally. Multiple exposures, if you want to toy around with taking 2 exposures or more on the same exact frame. Back in the day, you could do multiple exposures by not advancing the film. Well, you can play with that right here as well. HDR mode is disabled. That's another mode that's only going to affect your JPEGs. Moving on to page 6, we've got bulb timer is currently disabled because I'm plugged into the camera right now. We've got anti-flicker shooting, which is a good mode if you're going to shoot inside of a gymnasium with flickering lights. If you enable this, it's going to allow you to shoot between the flickers. It's actually pretty good to make sure you don't get that really crappy lighting flickering effect. We've got silent shutter because this camera will allow you to shoot silently. You would go into here and go ahead and hit enabled if you want to go ahead and shoot in silent. So for now, disabled because I'm not shooting in silent. Next up is silent live view shooting. I leave this defaulted to mode 1 as well. And high speed display is off and I don't have access to it because I'm plugged in to the electronic viewfinder as well. Moving on, we've got AF menu. This is another intense one. We've got AF operation. We've got one shot AF or servo. One shot means when you hold the shutter button down, I can actually show you this. You hold it down halfway, check it out. You hear that beep? It's locked in. As long as my finger is pressed halfway down, it's not going to refocus. But when I go ahead and press it again, boom, it refocuses. Now, when we go into the other mode, which is servo, that is continuous autofocus. So if I focus right here, it's in focus. I'm holding my finger halfway down on the button, and see that? I go away, it's focusing on the background. I focus right here. That's lightning quick, super fast. I love the EOS R for that focus, and that is servo mode. So you would use servo mode for shooting action sports, for things that are moving, where you need to capture continuous focus. And the other mode, which is one shot, is great if you're doing portraits and the subject isn't moving, or you're doing inanimate objects. AF method, you've got a whole bunch of different options. You've got lock-on tracking. You've got one-point AF, which is a good mode to use if you just want one single point of focus. I like to use expanded AF when I'm doing action, as well as expanded AF area for around, if that's a mode that I would like to use to get a little bit more expanded with my autofocus. I use that with the Canon EOS R Real World Review to shoot the horses running towards me. You've got zone AF, which is a larger area, and the camera's going to do more of the work for you. You've got large zone AF vertical, which is just going to crunch them up more for a vertical autofocus. And then you've got large zone AF horizontal. Now, personally, I stick between these three right here. If you do want to allow the camera to lock on and take advantage of that dual pixel AF, you could go ahead and use the lock on tracking. Next up is AF frame size normal or small. Check it out. This is normal. Let me show you. That's the normal box. Now, do we want a smaller box? If you want to have a smaller box, you go ahead and hit small, go back in, and now your box just shrunk. So if you don't like your box being big, you can make your box small. Here you'll see that eye detection AF is currently disabled. That's because it only works currently if you go right into your AF method and you go into lock on tracking. Now we could turn eye detect AF on if you wanted to go ahead and do that. Continuous AF is disabled. This sounds confusing because you're like, wait, I want continuous autofocus. But actually what this is saying is that if we were going to go ahead and enable this, and we show you what's happening, it's going to focus on this, it's going to focus on this. My finger isn't even on the button, and it's doing continuous focus. I don't like that. Now, that's good for video. I don't like that for photos at all because it is always shifting. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that to disabled. Touch and drag AF settings is actually a really cool setting, one of my favorite ones in this camera. You've got touch and drag AF is currently disabled. Now, what this is going to do when you enable it is allow you to use the LCD screen, and I use my thumb when my eye is up to the viewfinder, the electronic viewfinder, to move the autofocusing points. Because this camera doesn't have a joystick, this is super fast and a great way to use it. Now, in order to use the bottom right-hand side, I go right here to active touch area, and I do bottom right or top right. You can change it to wherever you think your thumb is going to be. I don't think you would ever put it over to the left, but that's just me. So I generally put it on the right side of the screen, and I'm constantly moving my finger like that. I love that mode. I use it all the time. At first, I thought that this camera, because it didn't have a joystick, that autofocus moving was going to be tough, but that touch and drag AF is super duper awesome. Moving on to number 2, we've got manual peaking settings, which I currently can't get to because I'm connected to HDMI. Focus guide, which is defaulted to off, is actually pretty cool if you're going to shoot manual. So check this out. I'm going to go ahead and put that on. I'm going to turn the lens from AF to manual, just with a switch of the button like this. So watch what happens. You get these boxes, and as you line them up, it will go green eventually to let you know that you're in focus. So I'm pretty darn close right there. There it is. I just missed it. You get the point. Now it's in focus. It's actually a really cool feature if you're going to go ahead and shoot on manual. So I'm going to go ahead and put the lens back onto autofocus. I'll leave focus guide on just in case I ever do go into manual and need to have that. Moving on to number 3, we've got tracking sensitivity. This is if you want to change the sensitivity of the continuous autofocus. I generally leave these set to default where they are because it does a pretty good job. You may find in the future, depending on what you're shooting, read up on these settings because it depends on what you're shooting, will depend on how you set this. But I did the entire real world review set with the default settings right here. Moving to number 4, we've got lens electronic manual focus. There's a lot of different settings in here. I leave this one on default as well. It really only affects certain lenses that you're going to put on to this camera. AF assist beam firing off, get away from me. I put this on to disable at all times because there is a focus beam on the front of this camera, and in low light situations, that beam is going to go ahead and turn on and bring more attention to you, so I go ahead and turn that off. one shot AF release priority. Let's see what this talks about. Hit the menu. It says focus priority. No shot will be taken until the subject is in focus. Release priority prioritizes shutter release over focus. So this is a setting that let me hit info again. Right now it's set to fully be on focus, or you could set it to release. This is another thing that I just leave on default for most of the time. If you find that it's not shooting and it looks like it's in focus, you may want to then change it to release to give priority to releasing the shutter versus hoping that the focus, or waiting until the focus is fully there, because sometimes the cameras miss it just a little bit. Moving on to number 5, we've got lens drive when AF impossible. Way to do proper English right there. It should say lens drive AF impossible. I don't know what the hell that really means. But anyway, continuous focus search, I leave it on. Stop focus search, well, I don't do that I just leave this one on default totally the way it is. Limit AF methods. This means if you want to turn off certain options, meaning you don't want to get to the lock on, you could turn that off and that won't show up in your menu anymore. I just leave this on default. There's really no reason to change this. Then we've got orientation linked AF points. Same for both vertical and horizontal. Yeah, I leave that where it is. Separate AF points, point only. Look, you can select which one works for you. It's going to be that if it's all the way to the left and then you go vertical, it's either going to stay there or it's going to shift. You can decide which one works best for you. I leave that on default. Initial servo AF point for lock on area. Auto is a good choice for that as well. So that's why I leave that on auto just like that. Initial servo AF point for lock on is currently set to auto, which is going to default to detecting faces. Now, if you want to go ahead and have it just give you the point so you can tell it what to track, you would want to go ahead into this mode, AF point set for those boxes, and you would just go ahead and activate that and move on to the next thing. So that's a good mode to play with if you don't want it to just detect the face and take advantage of dual pixel AF. Now let me show you how that works. So I have to get into continuous focus. So I'm going to hit the Q button here real fast. And that is right here. I go ahead and do that. Now we're in servo. So I'm going to lock onto the Atomos right here. My finger is pressed halfway down, and you can see that it is staying locked on that subject. So that's pretty cool as long as your finger is halfway down on the button. Now going back into the menu, we're up to the playback menu. Protect images. I don't touch anything in this anything in this setting. Now, if you want to go ahead and convert a raw image inside the camera to a JPEG, you could do that right down here, but we're not going to go ahead and do that right now. You could do cropping, resizing, rating, slideshow, set image. I'm not touching any of this stuff inside of the camera. I don't want to do editing inside of the camera, but if for whatever reason you need to do something quick to get a JPEG and then transmit it to your phone using the Canon Connect app, you could go ahead and do that. Moving on to the third menu, which is actually where stuff means something. You've got playback information, you've got display, so you could change what is going to show up on the image when you go ahead and hit the up arrow or the over arrow. So there's a lot of different options you could either check or turn off, because say you don't need this, you could go ahead and click it, turn it off, and then come down here and hit touch OK, and now it's all set. Highlight alert is disabled. Highlight alert means that if you enable it and say you shot a bright sky and it's blown out and it means there's no details, there's actually no details recorded there, it's going to blink at you. Don't be afraid if it blinks at you but your subject looks fine. That just means that there's no detail in that bright area. AF point display is currently on disabled. I actually like to enable this. This means that when I play back the image, it's going to show me where my focus point was, so I can see that I had it where I needed to be. Playback grid, I leave this off. Movie play count, record time is perfectly fine. View from the last screen, yep, leave that there as well. Magnification approximately 2 times. That's where I put that on for quickly zooming in when I hit the zoom in button. I'm gonna go ahead and basic instinct you and put one leg down here because my leg was falling asleep. Moving over to the wrench menu. This is a big menu. There's a lot going on in this. You've got select folder, I don't change that, but file numbering I always leave on continuous. This means that when you do a shoot and you take a bunch of pictures, say you take 10 of them, well, the next time you put a card back into the camera, if you had this not on continuous, it would start from numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you do continuous and you shot 10 before, it's going to pick up at 11 and go up to 9,999 and then it's going to go back to 0. That's just how the Canons do it. File naming, you can go in here and change the file name. It says 3G6A, whatever the heck that actually is. I could go in and change that. Like you can see that under user setting 1, it has fro_. That's one of the settings that you could set it to. So go ahead and change that if you need to, but generally on default that it's fine. Auto rotate is on right now for camera and computer. That's what that is showing. I only like it to be on when it comes to the computer. That means that when I'm reviewing a vertical image, I have to turn the camera fully vertical to allow it to fill the screen versus having it just show up vertical small on the back of the screen. But it still will rotate it properly in the computer. Format card, this is where you're going to go to format a card and delete everything that's on it. I'm not going to do that right now because I have files on here, but you would simply go over to OK, and it's probably going to, I'm not even going to test it, but I'm pretty sure it says, warning, do you want to do this? Let's test it. Oh, snap, I formatted the card. I guess it doesn't warn you. So I didn't delete anything super important, just a couple of test images, which I could take again. But just know, it's not going to warn you. Oh, well, I guess that's the warning enough. I thought there would be a second warning. Well, good thing I showed you guys not to test it out. I just formatted the card. Oh, well, I got rid of those files. Moving on, we've got eco mode. I go ahead and leave that off. Power saving is interesting. We have display off set to 30 minutes so that the camera doesn't accidentally turn off and ruin our recording. You could go ahead and change that display off, maybe say a minute, that after a minute it will go ahead and turn off. Auto power off is disabled again. From our standpoint, you can go ahead and set that to a shorter amount of time as well to save battery. Same thing with viewfinder right there. Moving back into the menu, we've got display brightness is what you're going to change. Currently, we can't change it because we're going out to the Atomos. I generally leave display brightness on 0. I zero it. I leave it right in the middle because I want a good representation of what my exposure is going to look like. You've got display color tone, another thing that I don't touch. Date and time, you can go ahead and change this for wherever you are in the world. Language, set to English because that's all I know. I don't know anything else. Moving on in the list, you got video system for NTSC. Touch control is currently on standard. Beep is enabled. Check it out. This is the beep. Here we go. Up, can't do that in continuous. Here's the Q button, and then I got to turn this top dial to one shot, hit the Q button again, and here we go. There you go. You got the beep. You can hear the beep going on right there. I like having the beep. It helps me know that I'm in focus. But if you are in silent mode, it's going to deactivate the beep. Battery info is going to show you how much battery is left and how many shots that you've taken. I've taken 12 and I've reformatted the camera, so I lost all 12. Recharge performance. As the battery gets older and degrades over time, those boxes will start to go down. It will take a while if you use the batteries quite often. So going back into the menu, sensor cleaning I'm not going to do because that's going to deactivate our recording, but you can press this and it's going to shake the sensor and get it clean, but maybe not perfect. So just know that you don't want to ever go inside this camera and touch the shutter or touch the sensor that is exposed. That could ruin it for you. And the other couple of things, we have it on auto and off as well. Let me cut in here real quick and ask you, how do you keep track of all of the cameras that you own just in case something ever happens? Well, I created an app called My Gear Vault, which is free for iOS and Android. It's the best way to input, organize, and protect your gear because you can get an insurance quote right inside the app. To download it right now, go to mygearvault.com. Now let's get back to this video. Moving to number 4, we've got shooting info display. When you go ahead into this, there's a lot of sections of this sub-menu. Screen info settings. So if you want to turn off having all of this information on the screen, say you don't want the digital compass in there, you could go ahead and hit 3 and then hit OK, and it would then deactivate that from coming on when you hit the info button to change the display when you're shooting photos. Then you've got VF info toggle settings. Same thing, if you want to go into 2, check this out. You hit info because it says edit screen. You go ahead and hit info and say I want the histogram to show up there. I go ahead and hit that and then I hit OK and now the histogram will also show up during this, which is really good when you want to see your exposure shown as a histogram, especially if you're outside on a bright day. Grid display, this will give you a 3x3 display. I think you could change that to even do more. Wow, look at that, 6x4 and 3x4. Oh my God, that's like if you're playing Star Wars and you want to blow up the what's that thing called again? What's the big ball called? The Death Star. Yeah, I forgot. It's been a long time. If you're ever finding yourself in need of blowing up the Death Star, you go into this mode and you would be good to go, but I leave that off all the time. Histogram display, I leave that set to brightness. Focus distance display and manual focus. I don't ever go into manual focus really, but it goes ahead and puts focus display on. And so that is that menu system. Now there's one thing that I skipped by accident. We've got the VF vertical display is currently on. This is really cool. Now I would love to show it to you, but because we're recording on the Atomos, it won't show. But when it's on and you're shooting vertical, all of your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO stuff at the bottom will switch to the bottom vertically. So instead of having to read it sideways, it shows up perfect on the bottom. And then when you rotate your camera back the other way, it switches back to the bottom there as well. Continuing on, we've got display performance. I leave this defaulted to smooth. You can see it's for quick moving subjects are displayed smoothly. That's going to be changing your electronic viewfinder, so I leave that set to smooth. VF display format, I leave this on display 1. I don't know why you would want to have it shrink down at all. So I guess if you wear glasses maybe and you have trouble seeing the outside of the frame, maybe you would go ahead and use display 2. But I shove my eye so far into the viewfinder, I personally don't wear glasses when I shoot because I like seeing through the viewfinder and filling my eye fully there. Display settings, display control, set that to auto as well. I just leave that right where it's at. And then the help text size is how big you want the text to show up when you need help. Menu number 5, we've got wireless communication settings. This is where you go if you want to turn on your Wi-Fi. You could also turn on Bluetooth. Check this out. Under Wi-Fi settings, you would go ahead and hit enable. You could set all of this up, but it has something called auto send images to computer and send to smartphone after the shot. Now, some people in the review that we've done have left comments saying that, well, because you only have one card slot, this kind of acts as a second card slot, a redundancy where you take a picture and then it's going to send the JPEG to your phone. But your phone has to be active, meaning on continually, so it's not going to go to sleep in order to receive those images. That's not, for me, a viable option or a backup. I think that's going to burn a lot of battery in the camera and become more of a distraction and more of an issue. As a last resort, maybe it could work out, because if you lose your RAW files, you would still have those JPEGs. But I just think that's overkill, so I don't go ahead and I actually haven't tested that out. We're going to make a special video just to see how it does work. But I will tell you that the Canon Connect app is really good, that if I was sitting here and didn't have somebody to record me, I could go ahead and see a preview on my phone and then hit record from my phone. It's an awesome setting. I think Canon Connect app is the best out of all the manufacturers for playing around with your wireless settings. GPS device settings is pretty much if you have a GPS receiver for this camera. Moving to number 6. First up is multi-function lock. That's this lock button right here. You can set it to say, oh, I want it to lock the main dial. I want it to lock the quick dial. I want it to lock touch control. If I, for whatever reason, don't want to touch the screen anymore, I could hit the lock button. If I want to deactivate the multi-function bar, you could do that. So basically you would hit lock. And then the last one is going to deactivate and lock this ring around the RF lenses right there. That's what that setting does. It's actually pretty interesting. If you want to lock things up, you could quickly go ahead and do that. Moving down, you got custom shooting mode, C1, C2, C3. You could go ahead and set those up. If you want to have custom shooting mode, say one's for indoors, one's for outdoors. The C3 one is if you want to shoot video. They're actually pretty cool. Whatever you set in C3, when you hit the record button right here, it's going to go right into recording with those settings. So that's great for you people that want to shoot photos, but then need to quickly get into video mode. It will go ahead and take over right there. We're not going to clear all camera settings because we just set them. Copyright information, you can put in my name, Jared Poland, FroKnowsPhoto, if I wanted to go ahead and do that. Same thing, copyright detailed, author's name, so you can put your name. It's good to have that baked into the file. You've got manuals and software URLs. It's probably a QR code, and that's exactly what it is, a QR code. Certification logo is not something we need to look at, and this is what your firmware is currently set at. Moving on, this is your custom setting menu. This is another super deep menu, but you've got exposure level increments. I have it set to 1/3 stops, ISO set to 1/3 stops, bracketing, auto cancel, that's another thing I leave on auto. Bracketing exposure, leave that exactly where it is. Number of bracketed shots, say you could shoot 5, you could do 3, 2, 5, and 7. That's if you're gonna bracket. If you wanna go ahead and do some HDR photos, you could shoot 7 different photos at 7 different exposures if that's what you wanted to do, and the camera would go ahead and take care of that for you. Safety shift, I mean, that's if you are safety, the safety in football, and you want to shift them to a different side of the screen. I'm actually going to hit info here because I don't even know what safety shift is. Shutter speed, aperture to prevent under or overexposed in shutter aperture priority mode. AE modes, manual settings are automatically overridden to enable standard exposure. Yeah, this is another thing I go ahead and just leave on default when I am shooting because I'm never in those modes. But it may be something good for you to play with if you find yourself in those modes as well. So like I said, there's a lot of interesting settings in here. Most of the time, I don't even find myself going into these settings. Set shutter speed range, same as what I showed before. You could say I only want it to shoot at 1/100th of a second to 1/1000th, and it would never go beyond those. Same thing with aperture, AE lock meter mode, after focus. You could go ahead and make these different changes. Look, default is fine for this. This menu is super deep and super complicated at times. Dial direction during TV and AV, that's shutter priority and aperture priority. I leave this set, all of this set to default. It's exactly where I would set it. Setting number 4, you've got custom buttons. Now this is where you can customize all of your different buttons. Do you want to have autofocus right here? You can see metering and AF start is when you're pressing the button halfway down. Go through these settings, see what works for you because this is a super deep menu. We've made changes to a couple of things, but you can just see what it's showing you. If there's a button on the lens, you can make a change to it. If you want to change this up arrow, there's a lot of stuff in here for you to change. On the right-hand side is it for video, and on the left-hand side is the changes for photos. It's pretty good that they segment this so that you could set it 2 different ways. So when you're in video mode, it can change certain buttons, and in photo mode, it can change other buttons as well. I want to show you the few things that I changed that I think are important for you to take a look at. We've got right here, this one, I changed the AF on button to allow me to change from one shot to servo, meaning if I'm shooting a subject that's running around stage, if I'm shooting a concert, I want to be in continuous focus, I'm going to go ahead and hit this AF on button, and that's going to change it to servo, so continuous focus. And then say they sit down in a chair to play the guitar and they're not moving around, and I just want to move into single focus, I go ahead and I hit this button again, and it changes right into single focus. I wish Nikon did that, but Canon does it. It's a super awesome feature, and that's why I set that. The next function I change is for eye detection AF. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and hit this star button, that would activate the eye AF, and it's going to be on continuously as I am trying to shoot that subject. So it's going to bounce around from eye to eye or just try to lock in and follow the eye. So those are the settings that I go ahead and change for this. Let's get back into the menu. You've got custom dials. You can see that you could change these to, this is where you would change the control ring. So right now it's set to aperture. You could change it to all of these different options. So if you want to change the ISO quickly using the control ring, you can do that. That may be good if you're shooting video, but keep in mind it can accidentally be tweaked or touched, and then your ISO is changing without your knowledge. So I like having knowledge of my ISO changing. Next up, we've got customizing the multi-function bar, which is this bad boy on the back of the camera. This is a super intense menu. We have it set right now for photos under the user customization, so that you can go in here and you can set it, and you can actually have some auto things that are already there, like check focus display info, movie recording, flexible priority AF and AF, or not assigned at all. We have user customization. The first thing that we have it set to right now is for ISO. I personally don't like having this on when I'm shooting photos because I can accidentally hit that because my thumb tends to go right there. But there is a way that you can lock it so that you have to hold your finger on for a second to activate it, and then when you take take your finger away, it locks it back. Moving on, you can set just the left button if you're gonna go ahead and tap that, and this would be for zooming in. And on the right-hand side, we have it set to the histogram. You could make changes, so if you wanna do like peak, or you wanna do the electronic level, you can change different settings for this. I personally deactivate this when I'm shooting because I don't want to accidentally touch that function bar at all. Then if you go ahead and scroll down, you can set it for image browsing. You can change what's going to happen. You could swipe to move through the images quicker. You can have it jump backwards. You can have it jump forward as you go ahead and tap. That's fine. You can just tap it in. Tap it in if that's what you want to do. Under this, you've got the multi-function safety lock. Right now it's on disabled, but if you wanted to go ahead and enable it, it would lock the multi-function bar, so you have to press your finger down, and then after a second, it would go ahead and activate. Now, we could look at About Safety Lock. It kind of explains everything right here. Hold the left end for approximately 1 second to temporarily activate. And then you could scroll down, gives you a little bit more information, but at least that's in there. So now you know what it does. Moving along to the outside, we've covered that. Let's move back in. And we've got clear customized settings. We're not going to do that because you just spent a lot of time customizing your settings. The next submenu is number 5, add copyright information. If you typed in the information, you want to have that be baked into the file, you go ahead and turn that on. Default erase options, I leave this on default. Release shutter without lens is off, so if you don't have a lens on here, it will not release the shutter, so you can't take a picture there, which is fine, because why would you want to without a lens on there? Next is retract lens on power off. Though this seems to be more of something that affects a point and shoot camera, I don't know of any lenses that need to retract that would work on this camera, but let's see what the info says. Specify whether to retract the lens when the camera is turned off. Yeah, retract this lens, do it. I dare you to retract this lens. It's not gonna retract because there's no way for that to actually happen. So I just leave this defaulted where it is, and then I leave add IPTC information set to off as well. Clear all custom functions. We're not doing that because we just set all of those up. And finally, you've got your own custom settings for my menu. You've got 2 different tabs for that. Right here, you can see that I've got silent shutter. It's for things that I want to get to quickly. I want to quickly get to silent shutter, so I put it here. Movie record quality, I put it here. I detect AF, I put it here. And I could keep going down the list and telling you that I put it here. And if you wanted to put more stuff in, you can go to the second tab as well. So that is the entire menu system. I know it's in depth, I know it's a lot of information, but go in here, play around, take my thoughts as just that. Try them out. If they don't work for you, go ahead and switch to something else. So now that we've wrapped up the menu settings, I want to show you how you change from auto to manual and all the different modes. Right here, you've got your mode dial. Go ahead and press the mode dial. You can see that it is set to auto with a plus in green. That's if you want the camera to do everything for you. Now, how you change this is you can go ahead and you turn the same dial that's connected to the mode dial, or you could just touch the one that you want on the screen. Now, this is flexible priority AE. This is, in essence, full auto with a little bit of expansion to that, so you have a little bit more control. P stands for program. TV is shutter priority, where you set the shutter. It's gonna stay locked in, and the camera's gonna do the rest of the work. If you have it on auto ISO, it's gonna go ahead and change the ISO to make sure you have the same shutter speed that you have set, as well as change the aperture. You got aperture priority, you set the aperture, so if you wanna set it to say f4, it's gonna stay on f4, and the camera's gonna do the rest of the work to make sure that it gives you the proper exposure. Next up, we have M, which stands for manual. It's the mode that I shoot in all the time. The better you get as a photographer, you're gonna wanna take more control of your camera. Now keep in mind, I do have a video guide called the FroKnowsPhoto Guide to Getting Out of Auto, which is gonna help you get out of auto and get into manual. So you can check that out at froknowsphoto.com/guide. That will get a free preview right there. Moving on, you've got bulb. This is if you wanna do a super long exposure and hold the shutter down. As long as you're holding the shutter button down, it is going to stay open. As soon as you release your finger from there, it's gonna shut the shutter. You've got CP1, which is another program mode that you can set. C2P, you can set that as well. And like I said earlier, if you set C3, you can set that for shooting video or whatever settings you want. And when you hit the record button for video, it's gonna switch right to those settings instantly, which really comes in handy. Keep in mind, these are the modes for stills, and if you wanna get into video, you would go ahead and hit the info button and it would switch into all of the modes for video. And pretty much the final thing that I want to show you is what you see when you hit the Q button on the back. I go ahead and I hit the Q. Now this is going to show you what's in your viewfinder, like if you're looking through the EVF or on the back of the screen. You've got your different auto-focusing modes. You can just touch the one that you want, or you could turn this top dial in this case to change through those. As I showed you earlier, to change from one shot to servo. You've got your drive mode if you want to shoot multiple frames a second. You've got high speed continuous. So check this out. This is if you want to shoot one picture every time you press the button. If you're in high speed continuous and you hold your finger down, you're going to get somewhere around 5 frames a second. If you're going to go into low speed continuous, it's going to be around 3 frames a second. And then you've got your self timer. You can change the time for that, as well as a different self timer, which I don't know why there's 2 different self timers, to be honest with you. Moving down, I'm going to hit the arrow and I'm moving to metering modes. Personally, leave it set to this metering mode basically all the time, but you've got partial metering, you've got spot metering. If you just want to take a meter reading of, say, me sitting here, you could change it over to spot, or center weighted average. I leave it in evaluative personally for myself. Scrolling down, we've got anti-flicker shoot info. That's where you would turn that on if you're in an area where there may be flickering lights. The camera will do a pretty good job of not letting you take a picture during the flicker. It actually moves fairly quick. So let me go ahead and hit that again. Moving on to the right side of the menu, I'm going to go ahead and hit down. Up here, you've got image quality. This should probably always be set to RAW. You're not going to have to change this very often. Below that is your white balance, so you can change your white balance settings. Then you got picture styles. You can arrow through these to make changes. And then you've got auto lighting optimization. This is another thing that I personally leave off. And then the last mode right down here is the cropping aspect ratio. So if you want to be cool and be an Instagram shooter and be 1:1 aspect ratio, that's where you would go into. But for the most case, you're going to be in full all the time. That's going to be it. That is a lot of information about this camera. I hope that this helped you out. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and also consider hitting that bell so you can be notified when I put new videos out. If you could like this, give it a thumbs up, and leave some comments down below with what you think and if this video really helped you out. So I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you guys very much for watching. Jared Poland, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.
Subscribe now!